Hi there, Vibe Gardeners. Welcome to another episode of Vibe Gardening Inform Edition, where this time I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to set up my hydroponics experiment using filtered tap water in comparison to the RO water. With that said, let's go. Alright guys, if you've been following my channel, you've noticed that I did my last episode on how I wrapped up my lessons learned with hydroponic spinach, where I had a teaser on what I'm going to do with my experiment with filtered tap water. And if you guys have been following my series on the filtered tap water, I just did my first episode a couple weeks ago, where I set up a filter in my faucet in my basement sink, where I was able to put in an active carbon filter to filter out the free chlorine and chloramine. And it also does PFAS, but either way, it filters out in the critical stuff to let me be able to use tap water for my hydroponic work. So this episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I set up this tote and over there on that system there. How I set up the system, and a little bit on also what I'm taking from my lessons learned from my Grow Hydroponic Spinach series. I've gotten there, how it's going to affect things, and finally I'm going to talk about my criteria for success and how I'm actually going to compare and measure how tap water growing works. So with that said, guys, here we go. All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is how I set up this experiment. So if you guys have been following through with my hydroponics spinach episode, the first one, my half-hour episode, I talked about how I set up the germination of the spinach to get ready for hydroponic growing. And that process basically stayed the same, because as I gone through my whole entire growing spinach hydroponically series and lessons learned, I discovered that with what I know so far right now, that is still the best way to get things done. I've not discovered anything better through the whole process. So I'll link that episode right there in the link over there, and I'm going to put it in the description below. You can see how that's done. And so right now, what I've done was, so the first thing I did was I took the germinated spinach after 3 days in the paper towel germination mechanism, and I took the most viable seeds, and I put them in, actually I put them in this tote here. And yes, I actually started everything using filtered tap water first, and I didn't even touch the pH or add any calcium magnesium supplements, and have it basically just sit there for a week. So all these guys right here, so I'll show a little close up in a minute. So these pods here all have been sitting in plain RO water for about a week to give them time to stabilize and get used to their environment. And then after that, I put them in each individual one of, so basically then I took all the spinach that I needed to fill this up over. And then also over here in this seed starter tray here, as I mentioned from my third month update on the hydroponic spinach, I used this to stabilize the rest of the spinach needed, also in filtered tap water. So that way the water that everything was started in is exactly the same, to make sure they're all getting the same exact start. But like I said, after a week of getting used to the filtered tap water, I separated the some out to this system here, which is running about 600 ppm of solution nutrition, and then here in the filtered tap water, I also added about 500 to 600 ppm of nutrition as well to give them equal baseline to start with. All right, so to remind everyone what this system here is, this is actually the hydroponic tote, the 2.5 gallon, actually it's 3.1, but it's really 2.5 filled with water tote I made for the lettuce experiment, and I repurposed this. As you can see, this one is still using growing lettuce, But here I've repurposed this one to be able to grow spinach. And like I said, everything here is quite simple. I put everything in here with my hollowed out grow sponge. And so one of the things that you got to notice here is that you see how bubbly this water is. And that's really because I changed my grow sponge to that of a biodegradable grow sponge. And that grow sponge, unfortunately, makes everything bubbly. But as we can see with the spinach here, it hasn't exactly affected the health of them. So this is about a little bit over a week now. It's about a week, and I'm thinking about 2 or 3 days now. As you can see, everything is growing quite well. And as we'll see in the next system, it is actually not affecting the health all that much. All right, in this system, this is before what I used for the second system, where I was using the RO water with the MaxiGrow system. And as you can see here, these are the ones that came from the other system before within that 1 week period where I was getting them used to water and light. And as you can see, everything is progressing on quite well, though this one is looking a little weak. We'll give it some time. If this one dies, I mean, if anything dies, I'm going to just chuck it up to essentially a failed germination, and that's totally fine. And but right now, everything is looking like it's just fine and going through. And as you can see under the system, we got the roots from the other spinach, and due to the volume of the water, it is not exactly bubbling like it did with a smaller system. But again, it's the same exact grow sponge, and it is it's likely to bubble some, but you know, here we are. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the stuff I learned from the lessons learned of growing hydroponic spinach from last time, and what I'm applying here. So basically what I'm doing here is to keep the nutrition consistent. I'm using MaxiGrow in both systems. That way I can ensure that the nutrition profile is the same. And the main thing here that I'm going to be looking for is going to be the pH drift. In this system, like I said already, I'm noticing a lot of pH drift with RO water. In that RO water does not actually have any pH buffering. But because of the chemistry of MaxiGrow, it naturally tends to shift and swing the pH downwards. But the good news is with tap water, because of all the dissolved mineral that's already in there from the tap water that's not getting filtered out, these tend to actually swing the pH upward, which actually is a good thing. As we saw in that, you know, the RO water with no buffering, we're seeing too much of pH drifting downwards. But with all the tendency of the tap water drifting up, it actually balances out pretty well in that within the first couple of days, I've noticed that the pH has been drifting downwards on this into the mid fives and low fives for the pH. Whereas with this system, I barely saw any pH drift, which really kind of asserts my hypothesis that actually I'm going to have less of a pH fight with the tap water. Another thing I noticed, I don't know if I can actually even show you guys because of all the bubbling happening, is that, yeah, it's kind of impossible to show you guys. But one of the interesting things I've noticed with the system is that when I poured in the MaxiGrow, because MaxiGrow is a dissolved powder. In this system, you do see some sediments kind of going around a little bit, but it's nothing I can actually show you because it's not that dramatic. But with the filtered tap water, what's been happening is that there is almost instant sediment creation and a little bit of cloud of cloudy stuff coming up when pouring the MaxiGrow, which means the chemical with the MaxiGrow is having immediate chemical reaction with the filtered tap water. And a lot of those, what's called a chemical, is getting bounded up in non-available form in the solution from the chemical reaction getting bounded. So it's going to be actually a little bit less of a available nutrition for the plant to be able to uptake through its growing process. So those are the things that I'm going to really be watching out for from my lessons learned, and we'll see how things go. Okay, now that you guys get an idea of what lessons learned I'm taking from growing spinach hydroponically, and you understand how the setup works, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about how I'm going to actually measure success and whether going forward using filtered tap water is something that I'm going to continue doing. As this is the main critical takeaway I want to get from the whole entire experiment. So instead of seeing the yield of the plant and also the other factors, the main thing I want to see is if the tap water is even viable. Because I don't have the means to be able to normalize the experiment where I'm really only narrowing down just the water types here, because there's so many other aspects in play right now. We're talking about, like I said earlier, with all the sediment being created, when I put the MaxiGrow in here, there is going to be a very real element of available nutrition in that ppm. A lot of that ppm is going to become unavailable to this plant. So what might end up happening is the total differential ppm from the actual tap water, which is about 300 ppm, because the filter takes about 90 ppms of sediment, or the total dissolved solid in here. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to actually potentially let the nutrition in this solution, the differential, be actually higher than this one. With RO water, there's pretty much no chemical reaction between the MaxiGrow and the RO water, which only has about 26 ppm of totally dissolved solid. So what will I actually be measuring here? Like I said, I'm going to be measuring if it's doable. And the doability here is going to see that if I can get the spinach on average to be producing the same amount of yield. And I know earlier I said I don't want to be actually comparing exact yield. I just want the yield to be close. Something that's going to be measured meaningful for what I'm doing. Because one of the things I noticed already is that the pH swing when I pair MaxiGrow with filtered tap water is almost no swing. But when it comes to just the RO water here, the swing is measurable and it's pretty frequent. So I'm going to have to continually use pH up in the solution to keep the pH balanced. As I learned from my lessons learned from growing spinach hydroponically, pH actually matters more in a cold environment like my basement here. So like I said, the main thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just measure the yield of comparatively, averaging between the final surviving spinaches and see if I'm getting comparable results. And even if we're within 10 or 20% of the difference, I will call this a success. And I'll likely start switching my systems over to tap water because it's just going to be so much easier to work with MaxiGrow. All right, guys, so now that you've gone through, hopefully watched the first episode of this whole series on how I set up the tap water filtration system, and now you watch this episode that ties in my growing spinach hydroponically lessons learned, I hope that gives you an idea of how I'm going to go about approaching this experiment. And like my other experiments before, I'm going to give you guys monthly updates to tell you guys the interesting stuff that's been happening and give you my observations and my non-expert opinion on what that actually means. And for any of the non-critical stuff, I will be giving you guys incremental updates in my shorts on my channel. So please subscribe and get your updates on what these things coming up. And also now that the soil planting season has already gone into full swing, please subscribe and get your updates, see what's been going on. And until next time, guys, keep gardening and keep vibing. Let's go.